To create an interesting still life, first you will need to compile a bunch of objects that have lots of variety. You will arrange all your objects onto the table while keeping composition in mind. As you're placing your still life objects, try to think about contrast that's being created between the objects, negative and positive shapes that are created from the objects, and think about the composition that you're going to be drawing from. After you've set up a successful still life, you can begin lighting your still life. Play around with the positioning of the light, moving the light around and seeing where the light falls onto the objects and where your shadows are placed. Now take a piece of newsprint or a scrap piece of paper and divide it into 4 spaces. Within each section, I want you to look at your still life and choose a different composition for each spot. While you're thinking of composition, you'll make sure that you're not drawing everything in the still life entirely. Instead, you're looking at where you're placing objects and how the composition is going to interact with the page. Remember that going off of the page is a good thing, and not sticking everything directly in the center of the page is a good thing as well. From your 4 sketches, I want you to choose the most successful composition and then draw on a larger piece of paper. You're drawing these very fast. These are just quick sketches to map out how your composition will look. Think of these drawings as quick sketches, just like a gesture drawing during figure drawing. Instead, you are documenting where the objects interact and where the negative and positive shapes lie. If your composition isn't particularly successful, now is your chance to get up and move to a different spot on the still life. Seeing as you're working from home, one advantage is that you get to sit anywhere you like while you're drawing the still life, so you can really pick the most interesting composition. This is the composition we will be working from today. To begin your still life, you're doing a quick gesture drawing of where all the objects interact and where they lie. You're working on capturing correct proportions, correct angles, and fixing any mistakes before you move into mapping out the values. The next step to drawing the still life is to map out all of our negative and positive shapes. We're starting with high contrast and mapping out the lights and darks within objects and also separating out the background from the foreground. Now that you're through with line and shape, you're working on adding value. Once you add value to the entire piece, you're going to go back in afterwards to look for local value versus global value. The local value is a value between an object itself, and the global value is the values that spread throughout the entire composition. The formation of the still life is very general to specific. First, your images will just look like a bunch of lights and darks, and that's because you're documenting where you're seeing value shifts. Then when you start adding your value and your texture, it's going to start to look like it's coming to life. When you're working with charcoal, you want to make sure that you're starting out using your vine charcoal. Your vine charcoal is for measuring proportions and capturing value shifts in the initial stages. Once you feel confident that everything's in place, you can start using your compressed charcoal. The pressure of your compressed charcoal is going to determine how dark it is on the surface. For example, if you have a little bit of compressed charcoal on your finger and you rub it in a certain area, it may be a little bit lighter than if you were to directly go onto your paper with your chunk of compressed charcoal and then rub it in with your finger with lots of pressure. That will give you the darkest value. Once you start working with adding value and texture, you're going to want to make sure you're bouncing between using all of your materials you have available. This includes your vine charcoal that you'll use throughout your process, your eraser pen, your kneaded eraser, your compressed charcoal chunk, and your compressed charcoal pencil. Your biggest asset is your finger because you're using your finger for blending. You can use your finger to blend in soft value transitions. So you can have hard value transitions and soft value transitions. If you have a harsh value transition, it's usually where a light and a dark come together, and when they meet, they create a contrast. If you want a soft transition, you need to blend your values into one another somehow. You can do this either by using the pressure of your finger, or you can use your kneaded eraser, and instead of using it as an eraser, you use it as a blending tool. So the pressure you put down with your eraser and you drag can determine how much charcoal you're taking off the page and how you're blending charcoal into erased areas as well. This process, and in fact the whole drawing process, will surely take practice and experimentation, so play around with how the materials work together. The fun thing about drawing is that you can keep reworking it, and charcoal is one of the easiest and most forgiving processes because you can keep layering and taking away. Charcoal is very moldable. Once you have the value determined within each object, you'll be able to start discovering mark making for creating textures. Is the object smooth or is it spiky? Does it have wood texture within a surface? Does it have multiple textures? These are things that you'll need to determine and discover types of mark making for each individual object. Here we'll slow it down a bit so you can see how we're using all the different materials at once within one object to create our rendering.